The year was 1811, and London glimmered beneath 1,000 flickering candles as though heaven itself had descended upon Grosvenor Square. Frost veiled the city's edges, softening the cobblestones and carriage wheels into silver silhouettes beneath the gaslight. Inside Lord Whitmore's grand ballroom, the air was warm with laughter, perfume, and music that swelled like the beating heart of society itself. It was the New Year's Eve ball, that glittering moment when reputations could be mended, or ruined forever, and among the crowd stood Lady Isabella Grey, silent at the edge of the world she once ruled. Once, she had been the darling of London's season, her name spoken with admiration in drawing-rooms and echoed in the breathless columns of society papers. But time and betrayal had rendered her story a cautionary tale whispered behind lace fans. 2 years earlier, she had been engaged to the Marquess of Pembroke, a match that had promised affection and security both. Yet when his family's fortune began to crumble, he did what duty demanded and chose a wealthier bride. His letter of farewell had been brief, polite, and devastating. It had arrived on the morning of her 24th birthday. Since that day, Isabella had carried her dignity like a fragile crown, visible, perhaps, but heavier than any jewel. Now, as the violins swirled and laughter trembled through the air, she stood near a marble column draped in ivy and gold ribbon. Her gown of pale lavender silk shimmered faintly beneath the chandeliers, elegant yet subdued. Every gesture, every breath, was deliberate, a performance of composure for a world that delighted in her fall. Across the room, eyes followed her, not in admiration but in curiosity, in the cruel fascination reserved for those who have once soared too high. The whispers came soft but steady, carried on perfume and gossip. "Poor Lady Grey, still unwed," murmured a matron in feathers. "She waits for a proposal that will never come," said another. "And yet, look at her, still pretending she does not hear." Isabella heard. She always heard. But silence, she had learned, was the only weapon left to her. She lifted her chin, offering the faintest of smiles to no one in particular, the picture of grace undisturbed. Inside, her heart ached with the dull, familiar throb of endurance. The orchestra began a waltz, the Marquess's favorite once, and she looked away from the dancers, unwilling to remember how easily he had once whispered promises beneath that same melody. It was then that she noticed him, the newcomer. He stood by the entryway, tall and composed, dressed in a coat of midnight blue that caught the candlelight at its edges. There was a quiet confidence in the way he observed the room, unhurried, unbothered by the currents of vanity swirling around him. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his early 30s, but his presence carried something older, steadier, as though life had taught him to listen before speaking. The murmurs rippled anew as recognition spread. "The Duke of Ashbourne," someone whispered, and the name passed through the room like a gust of winter air. The Duke was known to all of London, an only son, heir to vast estates, and a man curiously untouched by scandal. His refusal to marry despite relentless pursuit by the ambitious had made him a subject of endless speculation. They said he was cold, detached, perhaps even heartless. Yet the moment his eyes found Isabella across the ballroom, something softened in his expression, like sunlight touching the edge of frost. For the first time that evening, Isabella felt her poise waver. His gaze did not dart away with embarrassment or curiosity. It rested, steady and searching, as though he saw not the story others told about her, but the woman within it. A strange unease fluttered in her chest, something between fear and recognition. She turned away, pretending to examine the floral arrangements, but she could feel his attention lingering, quiet and inescapable. Moments later, the master of ceremonies announced the midnight waltz, the final dance before the year's turning. Partners gathered, laughter swelling like waves, and still Isabella stood alone. Her dance card was blank. None had dared risk the gossip that accompanied her name. The room glittered around her, a stage from which she had been silently dismissed. She was about to slip away toward the terrace when a shadow fell beside her, and a voice, low and steady, broke through the hum. "Forgive the intrusion, Lady Grey," said the Duke. "Would you do me the honor of this last dance?" The words hung in the air, and conversation stilled just long enough for the onlookers to listen. Isabella turned, startled, meeting eyes that held neither pity nor pretense. She hesitated, aware of every gaze fixed upon her. Accepting would mean inviting another round of whispers. Refusing would be unthinkably rude. Still, she sensed sincerity in his tone, an unspoken assurance that his gesture was not born of sympathy. She inclined her head with quiet composure. "It would be my honor, Your Grace." The orchestra began again, a waltz softer than the first, its rhythm tender and uncertain. As he took her hand, she noted the warmth of his touch, measured, respectful, yet undeniably present. Around them, the other couples blurred into color and motion, their laughter fading into something distant. The Duke led with effortless grace, his steps steady, his attention fixed entirely upon her. For the first time in years, Isabella felt seen, not as the woman scorned, not as the subject of ridicule, but as herself. "You do not favor the center of the room," he murmured after a moment, his voice carrying a trace of amusement. "Experience has taught me that the edge offers fewer surprises," she replied lightly. "And yet you risked a dance with a stranger." "Perhaps I mistook boldness for safety," she said, allowing the faintest curve of a smile. He returned it, subtle and genuine. The waltz drew them closer, and for a fleeting instant she forgot the audience, the past, the ache of memory. It was as though the world had narrowed to the measured rhythm of the dance, the brush of silk, the soft sound of his breath. When the music slowed, she felt reluctant to let go, though she masked it with practiced calm. The final notes faded into silence, and the clock began to toll midnight. The Duke released her hand with a gentle bow. "Lady Grey," he said, his voice low enough for her alone, "may this new year be kinder than the last." She met his gaze, uncertain how to answer, and before she could speak, he added softly, "And if it allows, may I call upon you?" For a heartbeat, Isabella could only stare, her composure faltering beneath the sincerity in his tone. Around them, champagne glasses clinked, laughter resumed, the world returning to its rhythm. She lowered her eyes, the faintest warmth rising to her cheeks. "If you wish, Your Grace," she said, her voice barely audible. He inclined his head once more, his expression unreadable yet somehow kind, and turned away into the crowd. The moment he vanished, the whispers began anew, disbelieving, scandalized, alive. But Isabella did not hear them clearly. For the first time in years, her heart beat not with shame or fear, but with the quiet thrill of uncertainty. The candles flickered, the music swelled once more, and as the year turned, she realized she was smiling. It was a small smile, barely there, but in its fragile curve lay the first spark of something that even scandal could not extinguish, hope. Morning light crept over London like a hesitant promise, glinting off frosted rooftops and the slow breath of carriage horses waiting on the streets below. The first days of the new year arrived with the soft, uncertain hush that follows celebration. For Lady Isabella Grey, it brought a quiet confusion she could neither name nor dismiss. The Duke of Ashbourne's words lingered in her thoughts, echoing through moments of solitude. He had spoken with neither pity nor calculation, and that, perhaps, was what unsettled her most. She told herself it was nothing, an act of courtesy from a man too noble to join in society's cruelties. Yet when her maid delivered a small envelope sealed with blue wax, her composure wavered. The handwriting was precise and elegant. Inside, a note written in a hand both firm and restrained. "Should you find the air of London too heavy, the gardens of Ashbourne House are open to you." Beneath the words, his signature, Ravensfield Ashbourne. The invitation lay upon her desk for hours. She read it, folded it, set it aside, and then read it again. By afternoon, she decided it would be impolite to refuse. And so, 2 days later, her carriage rolled through the iron gates of Ashbourne House, the world outside fading into the hush of winter gardens. The Duke received her not with ceremony but simplicity, as though friendship required no audience. He led her through paths rimed with frost, where roses slept beneath snow and the air smelled faintly of cedar. Their conversation began with pleasantries, literature, politics, the melancholy beauty of winter. Yet beneath each exchange flowed something unspoken, a quiet recognition neither dared name. Isabella was struck by his manner. He listened without interruption, replied without pretense, and when he laughed, it was not at the expense of others. "You surprise me, Your Grace," she said as they paused near the frozen pond. "I had thought men of your standing preferred grander diversions than quiet gardens and fallen leaves." "On the contrary," he replied, offering a faint smile. "I find honesty grows best in the cold." When she glanced at him, he was studying her, not with the predatory curiosity of London's suitors, but with the calm interest of a man measuring truth. That look warmed her in a way the fur-lined cloak could not. Yet even as she felt it, caution stirred. The world had already taken pleasure in her ruin once. She would not offer it another chance. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed often. He would arrive at her aunt's townhouse under the guise of returning a book, or of seeking her opinion on a charity he wished to support. The visits were brief, always chaperoned, and yet the space between formality and familiarity narrowed with every encounter. London noticed. By February, whispers ran faster than the thawing snow. "The Duke has lost his senses," murmured one hostess. "He spends his afternoons with the Grey woman," said another. Invitations that had once come weekly now arrived rarely, and always with a tone of pity disguised as politeness. Isabella bore it with quiet endurance, but she saw the strain it placed on her aunt, who feared scandal more than solitude. It was at a small gathering one evening, an intimate supper hosted by Lady Tolland, that the gossip sharpened into cruelty. Across the table sat Miss Henrietta Vale, daughter to an earl, a woman bred to wield charm like a weapon. She smiled too sweetly as she said, "Your Grace, is it true you've abandoned your mother's plans for an alliance with the Montrose family? London will be bereft if the season ends without your engagement." The Duke's gaze did not waver. "Rumors are a form of entertainment, Miss Vale," he said calmly. "I see no harm in letting them amuse themselves." Miss Vale tilted her head, her eyes glittering. "And yet they can be cruel. Especially to those already well acquainted with disappointment." The word struck like a whip. The table fell silent, all pretense of conversation dissolving. Isabella's breath caught, but she forced her expression into polite indifference. "Indeed," she said softly, setting down her glass. "Cruelty, when refined by etiquette, passes so easily for wit." The Duke's mouth curved, not in amusement, but in quiet admiration. The moment passed, conversation resumed, yet the tension lingered like perfume. Later, as carriages departed, he found her alone near the marble stair. "Lady Grey," he said, his tone low, "you endured that with more grace than any I have seen. I am sorry that you must." She shook her head lightly. "Do not be sorry, Your Grace. London has merely found a new melody to hum, and I am its tired refrain." He hesitated, as though weighing words that might alter everything. Then, from the pocket of his coat, he drew a small velvet case. Inside lay a locket of silver, its surface engraved with ivy leaves twined into a single pattern. "For courage unseen," he said quietly. "You may refuse it if it offends propriety." Her hand trembled as she reached for it. "Why would you give me this?" "Because the world has mistaken silence for weakness," he replied. "And I would rather it remember you differently." That night, long after he had gone, she opened the locket beneath the glow of a single candle. Inside was no miniature, no jewel, only a line of verse etched so finely she had to hold it near the flame. "What endures is not spoken but felt." She traced the words with her thumb, uncertain whether to weep or smile. For several days she wore the locket beneath her gown, unseen yet comforting, as though it lent her the strength to face the eyes that sought to judge her. But London's appetite for rumor is insatiable. When she appeared at the Marchioness of Ellery's charity gala, wearing a chain too delicate to conceal, whispers began before the evening's end. By morning, caricatures appeared in shop windows, crude sketches of a lovesick lady clutching a silver heart, accompanied by the caption, "The Lady Who Waits for Pity." Isabella read it once, then folded the paper carefully and placed it in the fire. Yet something within her cracked. She had endured gossip before, but this felt like mockery of sincerity itself. That evening, as Snow returned to the city, she sat at her writing desk and composed a letter with steady hand and breaking heart. "Your Grace, I have no right to resent what the world chooses to believe, but I cannot bear that my name should tarnish yours. You have shown me a kindness I neither sought nor deserved, and for that I am grateful. Yet some hearts are not meant to be mended in the light of others. Permit me, therefore, to return that which should never have been mine." She placed the locket within the folded page, sealed it, and addressed it simply, "To His Grace, the Duke of Ashbourne." The next morning, a servant delivered it to Ashbourne House. That night, the Duke stood before his window, the letter open in his hand. Beyond the glass, London glowed faintly under a shroud of mist and rain. He read her words again, slowly, as though each syllable carved itself deeper into his chest. The fire behind him burned low, casting long shadows across the floor. He did not move for a long while. Then, with deliberate care, he closed the locket and placed it upon his desk. Outside, thunder murmured in the distance, a soft, uncertain warning. Within the walls of Ashbourne House, silence reigned, broken only by the faint sound of rain against the glass and the whisper of a man who had begun, perhaps too late, to understand the cost of restraint. The snow had not ceased for 3 days, muffling the world in a hush that felt almost sacred. Outside London, in the quiet countryside of Surrey, winter rested heavily upon the fields, turning hedgerows into silver ribbons beneath a pale sky. Lady Isabella Grey sat within the narrow warmth of a carriage bound for the annual charity gathering at Brindle Hall, an event she had attended since girlhood. It was meant to be a retreat from society's cruelty, a modest affair of music and donations for the poor. Yet tonight, even charity felt like endurance. Her heart, though resolute, bore the echo of the letter she had written weeks ago, the one that had ended what might have been hope. When the carriage stopped before the ivy-covered manor, she gathered her shawl and stepped out into the biting air. The world was white and still, save for the faint strains of a violin drifting from within the hall. Guests arrived in a scatter of laughter and snowflakes, their voices bright against the quiet. She smiled as manners required, her beauty composed as ever, yet something within her remained distant. She had come only to fulfill obligation, not expectation. Inside, the ballroom was smaller than London's glittering halls, its candles fewer, its decorations humbler, yet somehow warmer for it. The scent of pine and wax mingled pleasantly with the faint perfume of winter roses. As she exchanged greetings with familiar faces, her gaze caught upon a figure near the fireplace, a tall man in dark attire, his head bent as he spoke softly to the host. Her breath faltered. The Duke of Ashbourne. She had not seen him since returning the locket. She had imagined he would not seek her again, that pride or pain would keep him away. Yet here he stood, calm as ever, though a quiet intensity lingered in his expression. Their eyes met across the room, and though neither moved, the air between them shifted, subtle, charged, inescapable. He approached only after the evening's speeches concluded, when music began and couples drifted toward the floor. "Lady Grey," he said, bowing slightly, his voice low but steady. "I had not expected to find you here." "Nor I you, your Grace," she replied, struggling for composure. "I thought the season had claimed you fully." "It has lost its charm," he said simply. "Too many words, too few truths." They stood apart, propriety holding them in its careful grasp. For a moment neither spoke, the weight of their unspoken history pressing between them. At last she said quietly, "You should not speak with me. It invites the wrong kind of notice." "Let them notice," he murmured. I have long ceased caring for their approval. That is a luxury men may afford, she replied. Women must barter with silence to keep what little respect remains. His gaze softened. And yet you return to these gatherings, still among them, still standing with grace. Because to disappear would grant them victory, she said. I will not give them that. The music swelled, a slow waltz that made conversation near impossible. He extended his hand without further word. Then dance with me once more, if only to remind them that grace does not yield to cruelty. She hesitated, then placed her gloved hand in his. The gesture was small, yet it trembled with defiance. As they began to move, whispers flickered through the room, but the noise soon faded into the rhythm of the music. The Duke's voice, low and measured, broke through the melody. I read your letter, he said. Many times. She looked away. Then you know why it had to be written. I know only that it was written in pain, he replied. And that I gave you cause for it. You gave me kindness, she said quietly. That was cause enough for their cruelty. He drew a careful breath. If kindness has brought you harm, then it was not kindness well given. For a moment, silence. The dance carried them near the windows, where moonlight spilled across the floor in pale ribbons. Snow pressed against the glass, thick and silent. Isabella's voice softened. You must not feel guilt, Your Grace. My fate was decided long before your friendship began. You owe me nothing. Then why, he asked, his voice tightening, do I feel as though I owe you everything? She looked up sharply, the words striking something deep and long buried. His eyes, usually so guarded, held none of the detachment society attributed to him. They were alive with quiet anguish. Do not speak in riddles, she whispered. You know what the world will make of it. I no longer care what the world will make of truth, he said. Only that it should exist between us. The music faded. Still they stood close, the crowd parting gently around them. Conversation resumed, unaware of the storm that gathered in silence. He took a step nearer, his voice barely above a breath. From the night of that first dance, I have thought of you more than reason permits. You have haunted my peace, Lady Grey, and yet I cannot regret it. You have made me see that honor means little if it is not bound to feeling. Her eyes glistened, though she did not let tears fall. You speak as though affection were a virtue, she said, her tone trembling. It is a danger, and you know it. Then I will risk it, he replied. What remains of my reputation cannot weigh against what I feel. A gust of wind pressed against the windows, and for a moment the candlelight flickered, throwing gold across his face. The tension between them was palpable, unspoken yet undeniable. She turned slightly, as though to escape its pull. You must stop, she said. If you mean to protect me, then protect me from this. And if I do not wish to? The question stilled her. Her breath caught, the world narrowed to the space between them. He reached for her hand, unloved now, his touch firm but reverent. I would rather be condemned for sincerity than praised for indifference, he said. They stood thus, hands entwined, hearts unguarded, while the world carried on around them. Then a shadow moved near the archway, a guest, perhaps, or fate itself, watching, unseen yet seeing enough. Isabella withdrew her hand slowly, her pulse quick and uncertain. You have said what cannot be unsaid, she whispered. And now it will cost us both. His answer came quietly, unwavering. Then let it. The snow fell harder beyond the glass, erasing footprints, softening all trace of what had been. The orchestra began another piece, and the room stirred anew, but neither moved. For the first time, honesty had found them, stripped of rank and caution, beneath the endless winter sky. And though neither knew what dawn might bring, both understood that their lives had shifted, that something fragile yet irreversible had begun. The morning light crept slowly over the frozen grounds of Ashbourne Hall, gilding the frost-tipped hedges and the grand stone facade with a faint, silvery warmth. Inside, the fires had burned through the night, leaving a soft haze of smoke and amber glow in the great hall. The Duke of Ashbourne stood by the tall arched windows, his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the awakening estate. His reflection in the glass was drawn and sleepless. The events of the past evening, her trembling words, the stolen confession beneath the winter sky, replayed endlessly. In his mind, he had spoken too freely, perhaps too honestly, yet he could not repent. The truth, once spoken, had its own gravity. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was his valet, bearing a sealed note upon a silver tray. The Duke took it, instantly recognizing the delicate handwriting. His heart constricted. Lady Grey, the script read upon the fold. He broke the seal, half afraid of what he might find. Your Grace, you must forgive the haste of this note. Last night should not have happened, and yet it did. I cannot deny what was said, nor can I face what may follow. I will be leaving for the countryside within the hour. It is better for us both that I go. Isabella Grey. He read it twice, each line pressing like ice against his chest. So it was to end in silence again, in retreat. For all her poise, Isabella's courage was bound by the very chains that London's cruel society had forged for her. Yet how could he let her bear the weight of scandal alone? He turned from the window sharply, resolve replacing grief. By the time his horse was saddled, the sun had risen higher, casting thin beams through the mist that veiled the fields. He rode fast, the hooves of his stallion striking sparks upon the frozen road. The wind stung his face, but he welcomed it. It cleared his mind, fixed his purpose. He had spent his life bowing to duty, to lineage, to the quiet tyranny of expectation. Today, for the first time, he meant to bow to his heart. When he reached the modest coaching inn where Isabella's carriage had stopped, she was already at the door, her cloak drawn close against the cold. For a heartbeat, she seemed startled to see him, then weary, as though she had known he would come. Your Grace, she began, her voice steady but resigned. You should not have followed me. I could not do otherwise, he said, dismounting swiftly. You cannot vanish from my life with only a note for farewell. Would you prefer scandal, then? She demanded softly. Your family's honor dragged through the mud, your title questioned, your mother shamed? He met her gaze without flinching. Honor means nothing if it demands deceit. My mother taught me that long ago. She looked away, torn between disbelief and longing. You do not understand, she whispered. You would survive it. I would not. Then let me stand with you, he replied. Let me give you a name strong enough to shield you. The words hung between them, fragile and fierce all at once. She stepped back as though the wind itself had struck her. You cannot mean that, she said faintly. Not truly. I have never meant anything more, he answered. For a moment she could not speak. The sound of the distant river filled the silence. He took a slow step closer. Isabella, I have spent years among those who call themselves noble. Yet none of them have your courage, your grace, your strength. You have endured cruelty and remained kind. I will not allow the world to shame that goodness. Her eyes shone with tears she refused to shed. You do not know what you risk. I do, he said. And I accept it. She trembled, her resolve faltering beneath the weight of his sincerity. And what of your title? She murmured. What of your duty to your house? My duty, he said, is to the truth. And the truth is that I love you. It was the first time he had spoken the words aloud. They seemed to fill the cold air with warmth. Isabella's breath caught, her gloved hands tightening around the folds of her cloak. The confession she had feared to hear now left her powerless to move. You cannot undo what you've said, she whispered. I would not wish to, he replied. Say only that you do not feel as I do, and I will leave you forever. But she could not say it. Her silence spoke what her lips dared not. The tears she had fought fell freely now, the last remnants of restraint slipping away. You foolish man, she said softly. You have undone everything I thought I understood. He smiled faintly, stepping closer. Then let it all be undone. The carriage driver, sensing discretion, turned away, busying himself with the horses. The Duke reached for Isabella's hand, drawing it gently to his chest. "Come back to Ashbourne," he said. "Not as a guest, nor as a whispered rumor, but as its mistress. Marry me, Isabella." Her breath faltered. The world seemed to still around them, the only sound the faint trickle of melting snow. "You would defy your rank for me?" she asked at last. "I would defy the world." For a long moment she said nothing. Her gaze drifted over the winter landscape, where the first hints of thaw shimmered beneath the morning light. "All my life," she whispered, "I believed I was meant to endure quietly. That happiness was for others, not for me. You have made me question that." He squeezed her hand gently. "Then let me prove it false." She looked up at him, the doubt in her eyes slowly yielding to something softer, trust, fragile but real. Finally, she nodded once, barely more than a breath. "Yes," she said. "If we must face ruin, let us face it together." A slow smile broke across his face, one of relief and reverence. He pressed her hand to his lips. "Then together it shall be." By afternoon, the news had begun to stir. Guests who had attended the Brindle gathering whispered of the Duke's disappearance, of the lady seen departing at dawn. But before rumor could sharpen its teeth, an announcement was made from Ashbourne Hall itself, formal, unyielding, impossible to misinterpret. The Duke of Ashbourne was to wed Lady Isabella Grey before the new year. The ton erupted in scandalized disbelief, yet the Duke did not waver. For once, London's judgment meant nothing to him. In the days that followed, Ashbourne Hall filled not with gossips but with light and laughter, as though the house itself exhaled after years of restraint. On the morning of their wedding, sunlight spilled across the grand staircase, golden and clean. Isabella stood before the mirror, her gown simple yet elegant, her expression serene. When she descended, the Duke waited at the foot of the stairs, his eyes alight not with triumph but with peace. As they joined hands before the vicar, the air outside stirred with the first songs of spring birds. The frost had begun to melt. The world, it seemed, had chosen to begin again. And when he whispered, "You are my everything," it was not a declaration of possession, but of freedom. Two souls, once bound by society's cruelty, now released into a future of their own making. The dawn at Ashbourne had arrived, and with it, love's quiet victory.